The Burros of Berea is a conversational podcast. We study the Bible and we talk about it.
Not all of us are of the same faith, and one of us doesn't actually have a faith.
And that's wonderful. We all love one another, and we're going to continue to talk about these things.
The things we believe in and the things we believe about what we read in the Bible. Not all of these are necessarily true. Some of it is opinion and speculation. Thank you for
listening and speculating with us.
There you go. That was good. Yes.
You are listening to the Burros of Berea.
All right. Well, welcome back to the Burros of Berea. I am Rick Welch, and to my left is Billy Eye Candy Kimsey.
After the holidays, it's Tootsie Roll, Tootsie Roll, Tootsie Roll.
I don't even know what that means.
So I got rolls now.
Oh, there you go. That tracks.
Okay.
I thought it had something to do with like little dog turds or something. I don't know why.
I don't know either.
To my left is Tiziana Mom, so hard, Severse.
Don't forget your jacket.
I like how you said that like a creepy girl from a horror movie.
It was just natural. It just came right out. Yeah.
Oh, my favorite still eat your broccoli.
Oh, yeah.
Straight out of Compton, Ralph Hicks.
Represent.
Behind the glass, Rocket Man, Andy Bishop. Sarita at the Edge, Edgerton.
Hello.
Jerry the Annihilator Lewis.
Hello.
I really want, we need some wrestling music, like legit.
Oh, yeah.
Write some wrestling music, Andy.
I don't write wrestling music.
You don't? So, guys, we've been off for a little while, huh? It's been a minute since we've been in the studio.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had, there's a lot that's been going on. And if anybody's been keeping up with what's going on, we were kind of in the middle of some controversial stuff. And that's okay. We're just a bunch of jackasses trying to study the Bible. And, but it's been a blessing. I think you guys would all say the same, right? It's been a blessing just doing all this together.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
whatever my equivalent of that is.
Well, when it comes to controversy, my next guest in his early days, I would especially say, Pastor Michael Miano of Blue Point Bible Church is here in the studio with us. Thank you for being here, Mike.
Thank you for the invite. This is awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad you got to see Asheville, North Carolina. It's a beautiful, beautiful town. Hendersonville's a beautiful little area. Yeah. So, I'm just out of curiosity. Do you drink milk?
Yes.
You do. Before you eat, do you normally bless the food, ask blessing over the food?
Sometimes.
So technically you pasteurize it.
Get out.
That's the only joke I got, but Cherry's got one.
That was good.
You going to bring it, Cherry?
Yeah.
Let's
Y'all
hear
ready?
it. Let's hear it. Here we go.
Okay. This is actually a joke that my husband told me that he got from his friend, so I was pretty impressed when it made me laugh. Anyway, so this
That
husband...
says a lot. That sentence said a lot.
It does. Y'all just don't know. So anyway, a husband and a wife went to Jerusalem, and they were over there, and unfortunately the wife died. So they told the husband that it would cost him $45,000 to get her back to the United States, or he could pay $500 to have her buried there. So he thought about it, and he said, I think I'm going to go ahead and spend the money to get her back home. And they were confused, and they said, we're confused. We're just trying to understand, why would you spend that much money when we're offering you such a good deal? And the man said, well, I heard that one time you buried a man here, and 3 days later he rose, and I can't risk that.
Okay.
That was good.
That's clever.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, that was very good. So, Pastor Miano, I ask every guest. We have several questions that we bring, and evidently we ask questions that get us in trouble, but this one won't. Can you tell us the first time you heard the name Jesus Christ?
I love the Burros of Berea, by the way. So I've heard that question asked, and I appreciate a lot of the responses folks have given. If I might start this way, I would say that early on in my life, my grandmother brought me to Catholic church, and I would sleep in the pew. And, I don't know that I ever heard the name Jesus, but I believe that's important to that story, or to my story at least. However, the time that I know that I heard Jesus Christ was when I was about 13 years old. A woman that would bring thrift clothing to my house, she would bring kind of garbage bags full of clothing for me and my younger brother, and to riff through and find our size. And she invited us to church, and we went to a born again. I didn't know any of these titles then. We went to the church there, and that was the first time that I began, about 13 years old, I began to understand that there was some sort of message behind the Christians, and Jesus Christ died on the cross and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And how old did you say you were?
13.
13. Okay. So if you will, take us on your journey. So a lot of us have actually read your book, so we might be asking questions along the way. But take us on the journey. So you first hear the name Jesus. Take us to the point of your salvation story and how you got to where you are now.
Sure. I grew up in a broken home, kind of passed around between family members, and my mom suffered drug addiction at the time, and she's clean by the grace of God today, my hero. And she, due to her addiction, I was passed around from family member to foster homes, ended up in foster care. And that led me obviously to a place of rebellion where I didn't know who I was. I didn't know who loved me. I wanted somebody to love me. I wanted some purpose. I wanted family. I wanted to know, what does that mean? And while my family was there for the most part, they didn't really play too much of an active role in helping me feel that way, feeling as if I had family. So I ended up getting involved in gangs. I joined a gang at a young age, 13 years old, and met some kids at school and introduced me to some other kids or older men, and that sort of was the story from that moment forward. I lived in that lifestyle from 13 to 20, 23, 22. From 16 to 19 years old, I spent more time in jail than I did home. So that kind of gave me my identity. It was just a troublemaker, just, this person that's going to cause trouble, go in and out of jail. And I was okay with that. And I kind of developed this idea that would be my life. I would be in prison for the rest of my life, and I would just figure my identity that way. And of course there was ego involved, and I'm going to be for the lack of a better phrase, the badass that is going to have this identity. And again, it was all about identity for me, and it still is. I would say that I'm still in a moment in life where I'm still finding my identity, learning about myself. And when I was 19, I was sent to prison. And when I went to prison, I lived the identity that I was going for about 2 years. And then my second year in prison, I realized that this street life, what I was being taught, was just not, it wasn't adding up. I wasn't going to get the reputation, or I wasn't going to be the person that I was going for.
There's no cherry on that particular Sunday.
That's exactly right, Andy. Exactly. And so there just wasn't, it wasn't working out. So then I began to challenge myself to find something to live for, and not leaving the gang, because it's a conversation in and of itself, but just trying to find something that I could live for. And I knew I was doing a 3-year sentence, and I knew I was going to go home at some point, God willing. And who was I going to be? And if this street life didn't add up to who I wanted to be, then who was I living for? And that gave me freedom in that moment to say, let me go on a journey. And I did. I started reading. I've always loved to read since first grade. So even in the midst of my gang life, I would read, and it would kind of be my relief, if you will, to read a book and get out of that worldview. And I began reading, and I started with the last thing I was going to start with was Christianity, because it just didn't really captivate me. It didn't seem like the people that I had met that were Christians were nice, but it never really seemed like something that, again, I've been to church before. It didn't give me any identity. I still joined my gang. I would even go to youth nights and so forth when I was in my teen years. And there was nothing there that captivated me. So I started looking into Middle or Eastern religion, Buddhism, and taking in myths, wanting to be the different person. So let me find something with the Greek mythology that nobody else knows. And I'm going to create my own religion, and kind of went down this whole experience. And I'm in prison at this time, doing a lot of reading. Prison will afford you the opportunity to read a lot. And so I did a lot of reading, and eventually I found my way to Islam. And I had heard Islam before. In my teen years, I would be in and out of, if I wasn't in jail, I was in like a mental health hospital. And, someone there is trying to console me with something. I had a woman that had taught me about Islam in a mental health facility when I was younger. So here I am in prison. And this sounds captivating. These people in prison, these Muslim men in prison are learning Arabic. They're talking about going home and changing the way they dress, change their entire lifestyle. That sounded like a lot more than what the Christian community was offering that I'm going to be loving, whatever that might mean. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I started going down the road of Islam and studying Shiite Islam. And the man that I was studying with, he was very anti-Christian. So he wanted me to learn why Islam was right and Christianity was wrong. So he would give me a lot of books. I still have one of them to this day, Jesus, the Prophet of Islam. And reading that book was ultimately what challenged me with history. I always loved history. And as I looked at the history there of Jesus and Islam, I began to have questions. Just, again, I got my GED in the county jail. So, I'm not some really educated person, but I'm studying and I'm reading and I'm trying to learn. So here I am in prison and I'm asking my mom to send me the Gnostic scriptures, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and all these different writings that I can try to get a handle on what is going on in history with this Islam and Christianity. And it was through that I came to see that the story of Jesus was either true, that Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead 3 days later, or it's a complete farce. And I studied and I wasn't going in the direction of Christianity. That was, again, this was more of an ego in my own journey where I wanted to create my own religion. I wanted to kind of have the right answer and go home
like Welchianism. Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah,
that's right. I didn't know a name for it at the time. Yeah. So anyway, to kind of sum up that journey there, I started going to Catholic services again. And again, I knew that when I was younger, at least I was able to fall asleep in the pew. So it seemed like it was a peaceful place. So here I am in prison. I'm going to start going to Catholic services. I started going to Catholic services and I got to a point where I needed something more. I knew like, all right, nobody there's greeting me. There wasn't any family or anything like that. So if I'm going to try to find something positive for my life and I'm going to go home and retain this, I need something more. So I had asked somebody in the prison, how do I go to Protestant Christian services? And he said, well, instead of telling you how to go, I'm going to introduce you to a person. And he introduced me to this man named Paul. And not Paul from Tarsus.
Not the Apostle Paul.
That would have been fascinating.
He was in prison.
Yeah.
I'm telling you. Interestingly enough, the man that led me to Christ, this man Paul, was in prison for murder. So there's even more to it. There's more correlation there. So that man ended up leading me to Christ. And he used something that I believe is very important, and it speaks to me even today. He came down to my level. He spoke to me in a way that I would understand. And he said, you're interested in politics? You're interested in history? Well, then let's study that. And we would study. And he had a shtick, if you will, with his version of Christianity. He believed that he was seeking out those that loved to read, those that loved to study, because he believed that we were the watchmen on the wall, that we were going to be those that are warning this generation that to get ready for the coming of the Lord. And, Jesus is coming. So that made sense. And he took my limited understanding, a kid that still thinks he knows it all, and he challenged me and he helped me study and he gave me a reason to live. I was going to go home from prison and I was going to help my friends. And I wrote to all my friends from prison, and I'll get in on my salvation experience in a moment, but I started writing all my friends, this message of Christianity is true. Jesus rose from the dead. There's no other way that you can make sense of this in history. And really, writing to my mom, writing to everybody I could. And I ended up, I love to study. So I sort of studied my way to a point where I would say now I got him. And I remember being in my prison cell one night and I sat there and I said, well, God, if you're real, then I'm going to commit myself. And by the way, the gang I had joined as a child, or when I was 13, was called the Gangster Disciples. So I had a familiarity with the phrase disciple. I understood what it meant to be a disciple. to be devoted to something, to learn, to always learn and want to follow after that idea and make that your identity. So I just used the same attitude that I had in that gang idea. And I said, well, then I'm going to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. And I went out to the prison yard, and there was, they all laughed. I said, well, how does one join the Christian community? And they all laughed. It's not a gang, Mike.
Yeah.
And no gang initiation. And
Oh boy.
We're going to have you go rub it out.
What does that look like?
I'm trying to imagine that right now.
A Christian gang
Initiation.
Yeah,
You have to
initiation.
know how to make fried chicken in the South. That would be if you're a female, you have to know how to make fried chicken.
How long
makes
can you hold
sense.
your breath during your baptism?
I'm curious if Cat o' Nine Tails somehow we get involved in all
There
that.
you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
The little kids
There's
version.
a real opportunity there.
Anyway, sorry.
Christian church is missing out. We got a real opportunity here.
I'm pretty sure that's Catholics, right? That would be Catholics.
it's funny you say that, because obviously we do know there are Christian traditions that sort of build on that idea of an
Yes.
initiation process. This is
They
how we
do.
know you're a Christian now. Thanks be to God that was not my initial experience.
Right.
They said, well, we'll pray. And, we cried, and that was a beautiful moment for me to see grown men that are in prison. And we were in a maximum A prison, the highest classification in New York State. And these men are breaking down and crying over me, over my salvation, the fact that I want to repent and change my life. So that was my journey to Christ. And I never looked back.
How old were you at that point?
22.
22. Okay.
So just so you know, like when I watch a fiction movie where somebody gets saved, I cry. Like I would be in that prison, like crying my face off when somebody comes to Christ. Even if I know, gosh, that's an actor, they probably don't, whatever, but they've come to Christ, I bawl. Like,
Well, if they're doing their job right.
Yeah.
You know?
True.
apparently we're not doing our job right.
Oh.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah. Well, if you think about that, like what you just said, Sarita, it's true. Like, and I felt that way too. Like whenever I had a guy that, the guy that listened to the 4th episode of our podcast, remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And then he reached out to me, and, I was able to lead him to the Lord. Like I had that moment, and I'll never forget that moment. Never. It's just that, like, do you ever talk to that guy, Paul? Do you ever talk to him now?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, while I was in prison, he got transferred, and I felt like that was my sort of getting kicked out of the nest. Now I'm the missionary in the jail, and he was known. They would call him, and I should have known this. They called him the Waco Wacko.
Oh.
I had no, Waco, what's that? And eventually I learned it was a place in Texas. Okay. But then eventually I was, now I know what they were going for in that jail. So he ended up getting transferred, and I became this person that was, I guess, my own version of the Waco Wacko. Yeah, that's it. And, and going around the jail and making it all about, we have to get ready for the time of the end. And him and I obviously didn't communicate in prison. You can't write to other prisoners. I came home from prison. I wrote him. I visited him. And I wrote him, I visited him, and then I ended up losing communication with him for a little bit after I became a preterist, which I'm sure we'll talk about. He felt as though I was creating an artificial...
Should we pause?
I thought we could be subtle, but it was
hard.
a very
It's hard for him to focus whenever I play him with all this
I was just
stuff.
like, put your right hand on that
I feel
thing
like
that
there's
you could reach
charades
and
going on.
turn
Like,
it.
first word, two syllables. What's going
I know,
on?
it was terrible. I thought that would be easy. I'm so sorry.
Just so our listeners understand, Pastor Miano can actually have a thought and speak. It's not a problem, but when we're all dancing around in the studio, it's very difficult. Sorry about that, Mike.
I apologize very much.
No worries.
My microphone kept sinking.
Yeah. So
I'm not good at charades, so I wouldn't have been able to...
I was very
Andy's
confused.
trying to coach quietly, like over there, just trying to, yeah.
So you couldn't keep in touch with this man in prison. You couldn't write letters.
Not in prison.
Right.
And then when I came home, I did write him. That's what you should do. If you're in prison with people and you leave, you should write them and let them know, I'm still thinking about you. I still care about you. And he was still my spiritual father in that sense. And I still believe that to this day. And so then eventually I had written him that I bumped into, and this is years later. I've been out of prison now. I came home from prison in 2006. And in 2011, I wrote him telling him that I had considered this, or I had become a preterist. Mm-hmm. And he felt as though I was creating an artificial divide between the word Jew and Gentile. He said, we're all one in Christ. So why do you keep focusing on this? It's for the Jews and Gentiles. And it was hard to develop that conversation with him, especially through written letters.
Right.
So he's home by the grace of God today. He's home now, and he's living a good life, it seems, in New York, upstate New York. And him and I are friends on Facebook. We communicate on Facebook, and he's probably going to come on one of my podcasts in the near future, and I'll get to ask him why he stopped writing me when he heard the word preterist.
Yeah, it's pretty bad whenever a murdering guy from prison considers you a heretic.
I'm telling you.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. So being a pastor, so when did that begin in your walk? So you were saved at the age of 22. Mm-hmm. And when did you become a pastor?
So remember, when he left the prison, I kind of became a pastor in that jail.
That's
I was the missionary in the prison, and I would make it my business. I would go to the prison yard and go out there. Everybody would joke. They called me Mikey Bibles, Mikey Scriptures, had all these nicknames. I'd come out there ready to go, finding somebody to talk to.
It's very brave. I don't even mean in the context of a prison. I just mean in general.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us won't go on the street corner in downtown Hendersonville and do it because somebody might think badly of us. Or
I mean,
I did.
standing
They
on a
just
street
didn't like
corner
my
and
outfit.
yelling is a little different than kind of talking to people individually. Even that's
but
the
he was
next
standing
level.
in the prison yard yelling.
Oh, were you? Were you like soapboxing? Like
Preaching.
No.
He said preaching.
No, preaching more so on a one-on-one level. Yeah, talking
Yeah,
to
see,
people.
that's what I imagine. Yeah.
I thought you walked over to the weightlifting equipment.
You're
like,
all gonna
you're all going to hell.
You're gonna burn.
I
that would
did
have been
that.
brave.
I did that. I did that once on the corner. I was wearing a suit and a tie. Nobody wanted to talk to me. It's like, who's this crackpot?
I can't imagine why.
No, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
even on an individual level, I think it's brave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I actually have my fair share of street preaching. So I hear that open air street preaching. I don't know that I think it's effective. And I don't want to speak bad of anybody that does that. Matter of fact, I'm working on something for this year where I'm going to get out there, and I think the Christian community can learn from listening rather than always having to preach at people. Maybe my idea is I'm going to get on the corner and I have a sign that says, "Can't we all just get along?"
Right.
And it's built on a game. There's an agility game where it's called Can't We All Just Get Along? And you pull a card, you roll a dice, and you answer a question. You don't tell people how to answer the question, what the question, define the words for them. You just let them answer it however they want.
Yeah.
And you don't have to give feedback. And I actually did this recently at an event in our area, and I found it to be very beneficial in having conversation with people. People like when you want to listen to them. Mm-hmm. So, again,
That's
ramble there, but
that's a cool idea. That's
That's
fun.
a really cool idea.
creates
Yeah.
conversations, get you to meet somebody new. So I mentioned the prison. That was my first pastorate, if you will. I came home from prison in 2006, and I began to try to find a local church. It would make sense to get involved in a local church. And so I started to journey around, and I was looked at strange. I have tattoos. I know there's a podcast that's great. But I have tattoos on my face, and I would wear short sleeves. I have tattoos all over my arms. And I was also in the baggy clothes style. I came home from prison. It wasn't like I'm a Christian now. I'm supposed to wear a suit. So, I still wore my baggy clothes. And I know I was looked at a little strange.
For the record, he looks very good today.
He looks better than all of the boroughs combined.
Very
Well,
dapper.
actually,
sharp.
I feel like if you combined us all, we'd look worse. So that's not fair.
Not a fair comparison.
But,
take exception
but he
to
looks
that.
better than all of us
I
individually.
take exception to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
He's very
disagree.
pastorly.
Thank you, though. Thank you very much. So I started to try to find a church, and it was hard. It was hard to, find anybody to even be kind to me. I even went to Catholic churches. I went to Orthodox churches. I went to born-again churches. I went everywhere. And it was just, I couldn't find a connection. Mm-hmm. So the man that led me to Christ while he was still in prison, he said, well, why don't you start a ministry wherever you can? He said, does your mom have a shed? And I said, well, she actually does have a garage. And he said, well, then use it. And I started opening up her garage. I set it up, what I envisioned a church should look like. They had church services in the prison, so I kind of knew. And I started leaving services there. Now, I didn't want to compete with churches on Sunday, so I started doing like a Thursday night, come by and I'll preach a sermon, we'll eat some food and a fellowship. And I started doing that out of my mom's backyard. And I had a side ministry where I would try to meet with pastors. A part of me coming to Christ was that I was a member of the tribe of Dan, and that I was going to be this watchman on the wall that was going to warn people. So I had known right from my initial Christian experience that there were Christians out there that were confused, that weren't paying attention, that weren't, being serious about the faith. So that was kind of the idea that Paul had ingrained and impressed upon me, was that, I was going to be this warrior, this reformer that was going to, and it was exciting. So I started meeting with different pastors and asking them, what are they doing to prepare for the times that are ahead? We all know that there's going to be a mark of the beast. We all know that there's going to be, these times ahead. What are we doing to prepare? So my ministry at that point was, and that was me pastoring, kind of self-ordained in that, matter. And then I did that for about a year and a half. And then at that time I was in a relationship where we decided that maybe we should leave New York. And my, you notice I stopped talking about the gang stuff. It didn't just go away.
Right.
So it was like, maybe it's good for me to go somewhere else.
So were you in the neighborhood when you're talking about doing this from the garage and stuff? Were you in the neighborhood that you grew up in at that point, and doing it from there?
Yeah.
Wow.
Still,
yeah.
Still in
It's
that
hard.
same area.
People don't like to let people change in big ways. It's difficult.
Yeah, that was a journey in and of itself.
Because it exposes them and their behavior.
Amen.
Even Jesus could do a few miracles in his own hometown, right? Because of their lack of faith. They were like,
right.
what? I remember that kid when he was just a little tyke. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I'm sure I'm not the only one, even with family sometimes, I have to remind myself of that verse to just keep sanity sometimes, Prophet is not welcome in their own hometown. They're not received, right?
Yeah.
So I left. I moved to Florida, Fort Myers, Florida. I took up an internship. At this time, I enrolled in school. I felt, maybe I need to get some credentials here. So I enrolled in Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. I was going online, and they had a curriculum where you would come to the campus, and they have two campuses. They have one in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they have one in Massachusetts. And you would basically go to the campus, and then once every quarter, take a test, and then you have to have an active internship. So part of me moving to Florida was that I picked up an internship in a local church. And they brought me on and they put me with the title of connection group leader, which was what some churches might call an associate pastor or whatever. So I was connection group leader. I would go to these different groups. And this was the beginning of my, ministry, learning about ministry, going to school. And so I started working in that church. And to kind of sum up that point, and my point there, I was working in that church as an intern, and I had an issue with something the pastor had said, where he said that we are a pan-tribulationist church. And at that point, I already knew, okay, well, there's those that believe in the rapture that are pre-trib, and I'm post-trib. So I believe that I'm going to be here going through the rapture, and I'm going to, help people through these times. So basically, I met with one of our pastors, and I said, okay, so how does this work, this pan-tribulationist thing? And he said, well, this church doesn't really focus on eschatology. We don't make that our focus. And you would imagine I had a problem with that. I was saying, well, wait a minute. Jesus said that we need to be prepared. We need to, I did know the verse about moving to the mountains. So we were making plans to go to the mountains, Luke 21:22 for that matter. But
Were you in Judea?
No, it was in Fort Myers, Florida.
There aren't any mountains there.
No.
If you'll permit me to back you up, so about when? So you found religion at 22. About when did you become a preterist? I think this is really interesting because it feels like you made that jump a lot faster than a lot of other people who have made that jump that didn't just come from a preterist background make it. So it seems like you moved there relatively quick compared to the normal arc that I hear. So when did you find that? I'm sorry, this is backwards totally, but I'm just curious.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I've noticed listening to some of the testimonies here on the program, I've noticed I have a sort of accelerated journey.
Right. Yeah, totally.
I became a preterist in 2010. And did you want me to kind of, I mentioned that I answered your question about the pastor, and I felt it was important to mention, my beginning in school, and then ultimately what I was doing there in the prison yard. That was my beginning of the pastorate, so to speak.
Yeah, that's fine. Just, you can keep going on the arc that you're on, and then you'll get to that point. That's fine.
I was going to ask you one question too, because at this point in it's basically your theological journey, you start out, your whole entire relationship with Jesus Christ is inexorably tied to the second coming.
Yes.
And so you're on this great theological journey, and I read this part in your book. I thought this was fascinating. You go to all these different churches to see what all these different kind of denominations are. You went to the Greek Orthodox Church for a while, the Catholic Church, you went to stay in the monastery. So where were you at theologically? Like, what denomination was this internship at? And was that playing a part in what you chose for your internship, where you were at theologically and how you were feeling about what denomination you want to be a part of? Like, it seems like it was kind of scrambled eggs.
It was. So the tribe of Dan that I was working with, I knew from talking to people that it was different. So I knew that if I was going to take on any sort of role in a local church, it was going to have to be a church that was maybe theologically moderate, not really big into theology. And the church that I was working for at the time, it was a non-denominational, easy believism. And I know some people don't like that phrase. It sounds mean. But it was one of those type of churches, much more focused on the community, much more focused on, again, doing some great, amazing things. But theology-wise, they weren't really, they were divided. The pastors that served there were divided theologically, which I didn't understand at this point, how divided, theology truly was. So I began serving there, and then obviously the pan-tribulationist thing came up, and I remember the pastor said something to me. He said, the church is like Baskin Robbins. He said, so you have to kind of pick your flavor. And he said, it sounds like you're going into a flavor that we're not, this isn't that end times idea, theology, pound your Bible type of church.
They're vanilla, you're Rocky Road.
Yeah, that's right. I was thinking
more
of
like
different flavors to
licorice.
say.
More like licorice flavored.
Right.
There's a Baptist church down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically the idea, that there's just, we could, I could find myself somewhere else. So the pastor was very good on helping me, maybe you need to find your identity. You need to find your calling. They had me taking all these different spiritual aptitude tests and different things. So I ended up, and by the way, I mentioned I was meeting with different pastors at the time. So I was serving in this congregation, but I was also meeting with other churches. So I was known around the area. Then, I was also an evangelist. I would go, do surveys at the local bus stop and things like that. So people knew me in the area, and I knew different churches. So when I had this issue with my pastor about the pan-tribulationist thing, there was another local pastor who was Assemblies of God, pre-trib, who knew me, and he liked that I studied. His thing was, well, we can take this kid and just tell him to relax with the post-trib stuff, and we can use him. So they brought me in, and they would let me lead Bible study. I would, share my testimony. I would lead our Thursday night youth group things, and they let me intern there because, again, I needed this internship to continue my schooling. So I started serving at the Assemblies of God, and I'm still meeting with different pastors, and I ended up in the midst of that, just to kind of fast forward into the preterist conversation there. I met with a pastor. The first pastor I met with was a Southern Baptist pastor who I told him, and I'll never forget this, and I shared this with you, Rick, that I met with him, and I told him he sat so patiently, this man, and just listen to me, this young know-it-all, and just listen to me kind of go. And he said, what would you say to a preterist? I was like, who? A preterist? And he said, yeah, somebody that believes it already all happened in the past. And he probably said something about AD 70 in the temple, but it just went right over my head. And I was like, well, why would I even bother? Why would I bother explaining any of this to somebody that believes some crazy thing like it all happened in the past or something that you're teaching? So I didn't even hear what he had to say. Continued on my journey, asking people. And again, something that was very important for me was, as I'm doing this, I'm realizing people do not have an answer. When I'm saying, what are you doing to prepare for the times that are ahead? The mark of the beast is going to be offered. What are you doing? And I would hear, some of the most unloving things like, well, we're all going to be raptured out of here. I was like, well, yeah, okay, that's okay according to your view, but there's going to be people here.
Yeah. What about the others?
Yeah. What about those people?
You're worried about yourself, and fine, you got yourself out, but are you thinking about the other human beings that are going to be left behind? Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Are you going to do something for them too, or just no?
Now, hopefully somebody will do something.
Yeah. Hopefully.
That was kind of the idea.
That's right. Yeah. I get it. Yeah. I know. I experienced that myself.
So, and then obviously you'd meet people that were maybe post-trib or amillennial, and they really didn't know what to say. They were just, well, we'll trust God, and whatever happens, happens. And I was like, well, there has to be a way that we could prepare now. And that was kind of my idea. At that time, I realized how confused theology really was. And again, talk about feeding the ego of a kid that thinks he knows it all. I'm meeting with these people and they have no answers.
Yeah.
So, and not people, I'm meeting with pastors. I'm meeting with, the leaders of the churches, and I'm baffled at this. So Then I ended up, I was at the mall one day, and I always had a Christian book. I think it's a great way to do evangelism, carry around a book. Somebody's going to ask you eventually. And I went to Chick-fil-A to get my sandwich, and the manager there said to me, "What are you reading?" And I said, "It's some book about Christian relationships or something." And he said, "I'm a pastor of a church. Would you be willing, you want to grab a coffee?" And I was like, yeah, that's my thing. I literally meet with pastors to ask them. So we go to Jersey Mike's. Jersey Mike's will forever hold a place in my heart because of this meeting. And
Not because it has your name in it?
I did mention the ego at this point. So
Okay.
Didn't say it was going there for the food.
So I ended up meeting with, at this time it was Pastor Alan Bondar, and he listened to my spiel, my whole, what are we doing to get ready for the times? And he was the only person that sat there with a smile while I was talking through this conversation. I remember looking back, nobody really had a smile except for maybe the pastor that mentioned, "What would you say to a preterist?" But he never really gave me anything to go on.
Right.
Alan, he said, "Well, what if I told you it all happened in the past?" Now you would imagine, I was like, "Oh, it's time to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are we doing?"
Oh, this guy over here.
This is one of them.
These
guys.
You legally have to talk like that in a Jersey Mike's.
Yeah.
He is from Long Island, so he would say, "This guy over here."
Is that what I said? Oh, he's one of them.
He's one of them.
Yeah, he's a preterist, and so then you would imagine, and I didn't get up and leave, which I'm glad I didn't. And I said, "Well, how does that work? What do you mean it all happened in the past?" It was just a paradigm shift, to borrow that phrase. That's literally what it was.
Right.
And I was like, I have so many questions. And he said, well, he started it out. He said, "What do you believe happens when you die?" And at that point, I began to talk about soul sleep, which was my view at the time. 1 Thessalonians 4, hello, we all, we go to the grave and we're going to sleep there until the Lord comes and he's going to raise us up. And he said, is that the way you believe the people that letter was written to would have read that? Does it have any relevance for the people then in Thessalonica in the first century? And I'll never forget, why didn't I ever think that? Why didn't I ever think about what it meant to the original people?
Right. When that moment happens, your brain explodes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You're just like, "Oh, it wasn't written to me." We're so selfish. It's like
Reading somebody
you
else's
mean
mail, are
somebody
you?
else wrote something to somebody else, and it wasn't for me.
Which
Really?
confuses me also. What shocks me is you were also in theology school at the same time, right? You were in theology school.
And I've met with a lot of pastors.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's fascinating to me is that even when you're talking about the institutions that are responsible for training and teaching the people that are responsible for training and teaching us, no one actually asks, or no one presents that to you at that time.
No.
Yeah.
And I
That there's
believe
historical relevance that needs to be considered.
It's important.
Yeah,
Just a little bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, again, there were some, like that one pastor that mentioned the preterist view, that he didn't explain anything. But I imagine he knew that he was speaking to a kid that wasn't really open to it. I had my idea. We need to get ready. I'm a watchman on the wall. Hello.
Yeah.
I'm the tribe of Dan. And if you ever read Genesis 49, it talks about Dan will be a serpent in the path that will bite the horse's hoof and make the rider fall backward. And you start thinking about Bible prophecy, horses, Revelation, Satan. I'm the man. I'm gonna, we're gonna get Satan to fall back from the church. So,
And make sure that, and as you told me, that we are supposed to be, as far as serpents and doves, that verse, remember you said that to me, that we were supposed to be wise
wise as serpents.
as serpents. And so that's why the tribe of Dan in their mind.
Yeah, that's
So the
it. You
wise
see
as
where it was
serpents.
all,
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
building up this identity and this ego. And I know that this pastor at the time, that not the full preterist pastor, but the pastor that mentioned preterism, I know that if I would have let him talk, if he would have seen some openness in me, he probably would have let in on audience relevance and things like that. But because I am a full preterist, I know I haven't mentioned that on this podcast yet, but I know that there are others outside of full preterism that do give high regard for audience relevancy. And I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
So I do think this pastor would have mentioned that at that time. So that was my journey to begin to hear about preterism. And obviously the next step was Google. I mean, hello, what does Google say about this? Heresy. This is the Hymenaean heresy. This is what Timothy was being warned about.
Yeah.
And I started to kind of pepper Alan with a bunch of, emails. I would, well, what would you say about this? How would you? And I wasn't asking from a place of, what would you say? I was trying to corner him.
Yeah. Let me prove you wrong.
Yeah. Let me show you why this doesn't make any sense. And Alan graciously responded to every question. I actually, in my book, Freaked Out by the New Covenant, I include the emails back and forth with him, and finally found myself at a point where it was, how many more questions am I going to ask that he's going to have a response to? And I said, I'm a preterist. Mm-hmm. And I went and I told my pastor that I was interning for at the Assemblies of God, I'm a preterist. And he said, Mike, we're not going to do this. Now,
just straight out the gate. Nope.
Yeah. And I have to back up on that and just mention one quick thing here. This pastor had so graciously dealt with me. You all have known me for just this limited bit of time. You can imagine I have a lot going on. I'm always in a couple different directions. I was going to sell everything I had and move into the woods. And that pastor talked me out of it at that time. He was like, Mike, nobody's going to listen to you if you live in the woods and you stink. They're going to think you're crazy. You're going to go even crazier than you already are.
You're going to wear like a camel jacket and eat bugs out there?
Yeah, John the Baptist, that's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Baptizing people in whatever you find in the woods. Yeah. I don't even want to know what that would be.
He was very gracious with me, this pastor, to help me kind of be discipled. So, he knew he was dealing with a young kid that kind of thought he knew it all. So I respect him looking back that he dealt with so many different issues with me that it was like, oh God, how am I going to do this? And I was like, could we just go through Matthew chapter 24? And he said, no. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to take it to the internet. And I went home and I made a YouTube video quoting my pastor and doing all that with my friends and a couple others in my fellowship. And you would imagine, he said, okay, well, you're going to lose your internship. And I just kept making YouTube videos. And then obviously they said, well, but the opportunity, you either have to delete the YouTube videos or you'll forfeit your internship here. And
all you were doing was just studying Matthew 24?
Well, I was teaching on YouTube and citing my pastor's name, and it probably wasn't the right thing to do. No, or loving or careful. There is a part of, we were talking about that tonight, where when you present truth to people, we have to respect that there's times where people aren't going to be open to certain truths. We have to respect that, and then we also have to make sure that the things we're saying are clear. And I know this pastor was thinking, this kid, he already thinks he knows it all. He's running around telling all people all kinds of stuff. They already disagreed with me about pre-post-trib. Preterism's a whole other animal. Yeah. So then I ended up losing the internship there. And I say all of that because imagine what this is doing to me as a person. It's kind of building up this know-it-all mentality. Nobody's, I needed somebody, to be quite honest, I look back now, hindsight bias, I needed somebody to rebuke me and say, relax for a minute.
Yeah.
Relax. You might be right. Nobody was going to tell me that, but I needed that. And that was kind of the beginning of my preterist journey and I appreciate what you mentioned, how, the end times was a part of my journey from the very beginning. It's not like I was a Christian and then I started to study the end times and I ended up in this preterist, view. And now I'm arguing with people on Facebook. This was my whole, if the end times aren't in our future and I'm not a part of the tribe of Dan, which I was led to Christ through believing, the whole thing starts to lose its feet.
Right.
And that's why the end times, even to this day, continues to be something that is a focal point for me, all the while knowing that discipleship is the root of the Christian message.
Sure. So whenever you have, like what you just said kind of resounds well with me about you needed to be rebuked. And a lot of, do you think that you would have received a rebuke? If it had been done in a loving way,
Well, he had
perhaps?
told you not to, but he didn't accept that.
Right.
He told him to take it down. He didn't accept that rebuke either. That was a sort of a gentle way of rebuking him. Hey, we're giving you these opportunities to redeem yourself, keep your internship.
Yeah, we'll keep you here. You just got to quit saying that out loud. And then when you get done here, then go do what you want.
But was it based on like what you're teaching is something that's against what they're teaching at Gordon Conwell, obviously, right? And so that's the problem?
Well, the church has no affiliation with the school at this point.
Okay.
As long as I have an internship, it was very loose with that. They didn't really care where the internship was. So it really wasn't threatening my school.
Church of Satan.
He was just like, keep my name out your mouth, really.
It sounds to me like you were being the way I am envisioning your description to come out, that maybe he felt it was a little personal, not necessarily even what you were saying, but also that it wasn't just you preaching what you believed. It was you preaching what you believed directly in opposition to
Right.
that place and him. And even if he could have just overlooked the preterism, maybe the other thing was a little too difficult to get past.
But even then,
I've known everything. Trust me. I feel it. Tiziana, you stop.
yeah.
The reason I ask you the question is because, okay, so fine, there was a rebuke, but there's still that you've got this information that you know that you're trying to get out. You have the ego and the things that are there. So in order to rebuke someone that's in the position that you're in, there is a different way to approach you. And that's what we have to learn, because rebuking is part of who we are. I need to be rebuked. It has to happen. But there are ways that you can approach. And so we have to learn. We learn one another and how we can speak to one another. And I've found that if you come at somebody with an understanding and like, man, like I would look at you and say, look at where you've come. Like, this is an amazing kid. Like, this is something else. I'm enjoying watching your fire, man. Like I am. But can I talk to you about a couple of things about the way that we talk to one another? Maybe you wouldn't have listened. Maybe you'd have just been like, balls to the wall. This is just the way it's going to be. And this is how it all works out. We all believe in God's sovereignty here. But whatever it might be, you are who you were. That wild donkey of a man, right? Mm-hmm. You were going to do it. But there are moments in time whenever Christians have to talk to other Christians and say, okay, you need to stop for just a minute. You need to relax, and we're hearing these words right now, screaming heretic. We're in the midst of, we're embroiled in it, which now I feel like, oh, well, we're supposed to be, because we're going to try to teach you guys how to do it right. But we're not going to do it in an ugly way. We're going to do it. We're going to hug you while we do it. I might bear hug you really hard until you.
Well, what you're talking about is you can't match ego with ego.
Right.
You're only going to the barn's going to burn down faster if you bring fire to a flame.
Right.
So there's this whole idea that, when it comes to conversations of theology and doctrine and dogma, that I have to have the Popeye arm, and so there's a toxic masculinity that gets involved. Sorry.
There is such a thing as toxic femininity. We'll get into that later.
There absolutely is. But when it comes to the Christian church and when it comes to how it's historically been tied to masculinity, though, it becomes this fight for power inside the ring, instead of like what you're saying, Rick, just, edifying and lifting up one another and pointing out the parts of someone we disagree with that you agree with, that you think are beautiful and loving. And then maybe from there saying, hey, would you mind having this conversation? Like, there's a different way to do it.
Yeah.
I don't care where you come from. That is an incredibly difficult conversation to have.
Mm-hmm.
And there's very few good ways. God, you have to be so careful where you're like, you have this like closely held worldview that I absolutely know is wrong. Like,
but,
oh boy, how do you say that's so hard?
I want to give you an example.
To approach someone like that.
Believers have something that they all agree on, and it's the Word of God. Okay, like we all look at the Bible. We might disagree on specific points about it, but we can all speak through the Word to each other. So when you are, we learn that we need to rebuke someone, but also we have to lift one another up. Like that comes from the Word. Like that, it talks about edification of the church. So I don't know if you remember during the roundtable, which released today, by the way, there was a moment when everything got kind of hairy and wild, and we were, and I was trying to remind everybody that earlier in the day that the thief was railing at Jesus earlier in the day. So what changed in the thief's life by the time he was walking through the streets to when he got put on the cross and was looking at somebody that was nothing more than just a criminal as he was? Remember, Jesus was being crucified as a criminal. And so here's 3 criminals. But by the end of the day, he saw somebody different. Suddenly he saw this man with the crown of thorns as a king. And so that, to me, like when we talk to one another, sometimes we have to kind of go in a roundabout way. We don't have to just quote the scripture. Sometimes it's the nuances of what we've learned from the scripture that can actually reach somebody. We have to remember, if you are a premillennial dispensationalist or you are a full preterist, we both have a king. You understand?
Yeah.
Now, it's about when he does or whatever, but he's still a king. And we are his subjects, correct? He's made us co-heirs. We all agree with that. Whenever we become co-heirs, yeah, we can get into that. I think there's always a time for that. We've got to study to show ourselves approved, a workman that needeth not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. That's scriptural. We know that, and Christians can say that to one another. But we have to remember the nuances that we all have a king, and without him, we have no salvation.
Amen. Yeah, I think, I think
I'm
it's
so right. Man, I'm so right.
And that doesn't
humble too.
I was going to say, where's the Academy Award? Like, I just feel like,
Wow. So are you saying, Rick, like my words that I've used, like, who cares? We're all going to heaven, right?
No, not all.
Well, no.
Everyone that accepts Jesus in their heart,
Yeah, absolutely.
whether they're right
Yeah.
or wrong about what they interpret the Bible to be.
So by saying who cares,
You know what I'm saying.
as long
I'm not
as-
being like, oh, just who cares about preterists or this or that or that.
About whether you get it right or wrong, you
Yes,
mean?
exactly.
So
I'm not going to go in there Christmas Eve day and tell my grandmother at 85 years old that thinks Jesus is coming back
yeah,
that he's not.
yeah,
Because guess what? My granny Doris is going to be with
understood.
Papa no matter
Yeah.
what.
Well,
so
and it's scriptural too that there is a time and a season for all things.
yeah.
So I think you're right. Your granny probably taught you more about Jesus than you're ever going to teach her.
Yes, absolutely.
Am I right?
Yeah, yeah.
So now you're going to teach. Now, if the moment ever comes, maybe you never know what's going to happen. She might look at you and say, I always wondered if he was ever going to come. But
Yeah,
if she
yeah.
ever shows that moment, then you'd be like, well, I was wondering. You remember he talked about the temple. You could. Do you really
Yeah.
want to broach the topic with your 85-year-old grandma? No.
No,
You'd rather
you know
just
what I
enjoy
gave her
your
for
time
Christmas?
with her.
A pack of Pall Malls.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I gave
Right.
her. You know, and
Yeah.
I mean, I love my granny Doris. You
Yeah.
know, so
Hanging with Bender.
And as far as, yeah. Did you say Bender?
Yes.
Oh, that's a Breakfast Club reference. So whenever you feel that, I think it's, and I don't want to derail, your testimony, Mike, but as far as saying, so who cares? You could do that with everything in the Bible.
oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So you could honestly say, well, who cares that God created the world? Well, God thought it was worthy enough to give it to someone to write it about himself. And so he did it. And down through the ages, somehow we get the canon of scripture and now we have it. And we attest to it with our spirit. So, theoretically we could say who cares about everything. But I think that when it becomes a problem between us, that's when the who cares needs to pop up. When
Yeah.
you start yelling and screaming at each other and no one's getting built up, it's all getting torn down. Who cares at that point?
Yeah, yeah.
But if it's like if we're
when
in
you're
a-
popping chests and look at me,
Right.
yeah.
I mean, really, because it
But
becomes
anyway.
about ego. It doesn't come about
Yeah.
fellowship anymore.
So anyway,
So back to you, Mike.
Well, if I might share a quote in the midst of that conversation, I read this quote earlier today by Mark Horton that kind of leans in on that. It says this: if a Christian makes erroneous arguments from Scripture on a matter that unbelievers know perfectly well, we should not expect them to believe the Scriptures on the more important matters of sin and salvation. So you see where it does become important, because you have people saying, we talk about science in the church, we talk about the end times in the church, we talk about all these things where there's people outside the church that know that doesn't make good nonsense. So we do have to shape up in some regards. We are called to study to show ourselves approved,
right.
So there is a part where it does matter because it has to do with our witness to the world. And obviously, I know you've interviewed Gary DeMar on here, and he talks a lot about with the end times and eschatology particularly, where that attitude of, we're going to go to the pie in the sky, that whole attitude, it's all about just going to heaven and forsaking this ugly, despicable planet that God has created, that's detrimental to the Christian attitude and what the kingdom of God that we're manifesting. So, and again, in the midst of all that, there's a lot of grace. There should be a lot of grace. This is the Christian message. This is the gospel. So there needs to be room for that. So I'm just saying, I think that it is important to be very clear on what we're saying and what is right, what's wrong, and to be an intelligent people. If I might say one other thing I wanted to highlight that you talked about there with thinking about what you said, would I have received the rebuke? Probably not. I believe the Christian experience, we should all be endeavoring toward becoming more gracious and gentle people. If as Christians, we're not becoming more gentle and gracious in our experience, we probably need to do a little bit more self-examination to see if we're in the faith. So I say that because now, only in hindsight bias can I say most of the things I'm saying on here the way I am.
Yeah.
That, I can talk about my experiences and realize, wow, I should have shown more grace in that situation. I needed to look at it from that pastor's experience of what he was dealing with. Mike, you're a know-it-all. You need to die to yourself so that Christ might increase. These are things that I have to constantly remind myself of.
Right.
So I say that because I don't know that I would have received the rebuke then, but I'm glad to say that if it was told to me today, in many regards, I will receive the rebuke, and I'm sure in other areas I won't.
When you think about just how we act to one another, and when you see somebody that starts to mature in the faith, and you've seen them as like this, they're radical in the beginning, we say they're on fire for God, and then things start to wane and you think, oh, they're losing it. But then they're actually just like gaining more grace. Like you can see it in Keith Green's life. Have you ever heard of Keith Green?
He's
my favorite.
I read his book, Powerhouse, in the 6th grade.
Wow. So No Compromise is one of my favorite books. And Keith Green, if you watch his ministry, that dude is absolutely ripping the church a new one. Asleep in the light. Where are you at? Let's get out here. We got to work. What's the name of his ministries? Last Days Ministries. He was wild and on fire. Of course, he dies in 1982 in a plane crash.
Horrible.
Very sad.
But right
sad.
before he dies, he has this grace that he's learned. You can see he's learned a tremendous amount about grace. He's taken on all these people, like homeless people. He's living the kingdom life is what he's done. And I watched that happen. We're able to look back at his life and watch that unfold. And I always wonder, what is the Lord watching with us? And we know where he's at and where the level that Christ, let's just be real, he brings us and elevates us to his level and makes us a co-heir. I mean, what?
Talk about the divine comedy.
Yeah. I mean, especially for me, I have mucked about for a long time, but that's where I feel the grace and the love is from that, is that I can think about you, Tiziana. You got these little kids and you're going to raise them and you're going to watch them and they go, no, mom. And they're going to have all these things. And even in the midst of that, you're going to love them. You're just going to keep loving them. You're going to smack them in the mouth.
Actually, you learn more about grace.
Yeah.
Having children than just about any other time. And there have been times when I've been like, you know what? I should probably rip you a new one because you did blah, blah, yada, so-and-so. But the Lord should have done the same thing to me. I'm going to show you grace and I'm going to show you mercy. And you go to your room for a time and we're going to have a time to talk about it. So you will learn about that grace and that mercy through that. But,
it's kind of like a purgatory.
I think when we talk about
the 12th year,
Jesus being the truth, I am not a preterist. I think we had this discussion already. Being part of this group has made me study more, made me want to learn more. I am studying. I feel firmly where I am. But for you to sit here and tell me that I'm in error and that affects my walk, my witness to others, I take a little bit of offense at that because once or twice a week, I sit in a room with young ladies who are facing crisis pregnancies and I share with them the love and grace and mercy of Jesus Christ. Every day. I did it yesterday twice. We didn't talk about the end times. I may never see them again. My eschatology did not enter that room, but my Jesus did. My truth with Jesus did. Not my truth, the truth entered that room. And so I think we have to be very careful in the way we speak to one another who may have different eschatological views, that we must speak to one another in kindness, because I would never say you're a heretic. And I know that there are people who do. I think that's wrong. And I had a pastor say that to me recently. I said, I think you're wrong, Pastor. I don't think they're heretics. We all have the same God is sovereign. But we have to be careful how we speak to one another in the way that we can come off cocksure. My way is right, and I'm a pre-trib, and I'm a post-trib, and I'm an amillennial, which I'm just learning what that is. We talked about how people speak to one another online. I think we had this discussion earlier, and we just have to be super careful because that witness comes across much more than if I'm going along and sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. Him died, buried, and resurrected. So I think we just have to be careful when we call each other as an error or because basically that's saying I believe in an untruth.
I think it depends on the situation, though, because I hear what you're saying, and I agree with it a lot, but I disagree with a little bit of it in that if he's on his podcast and his podcast is about this and he's saying that you're wrong, well, you came to his podcast and that's his opinion. You have the right not to listen to that. And the same thing if he comes on, especially if you've heard some of the things that he said, and this is for anyone. This isn't just for Mike sitting here. This because I hear people doing this all the time. They listen to somebody's podcast and then all they do is say bad things. Well, then just don't listen to his podcast. Don't just listen to his podcast so you can say something bad to him. So if you're going to be on their podcast or if you're going to be a part of a group of people discussing something, you know what this guy is all about. Listen to what he has to say.
I think the difference you guys are speaking to is like a megaphone versus an interpersonal conversation.
Right. Yeah. So if you're
because
we're out
you
of
have
this
to approach those
situation,
things differently. You really do.
If we're not here in this room talking to Mike about his salvation and the way he believes, or we're not on his podcast and he's talking to us about his podcast, but we're, somewhere we met on the street and we're having a conversation. I absolutely agree with you 100% in that situation, in all of those situations. Then we really got to be careful how we approach people, because I don't think there's any two people on the planet that believe
exactly the same.
Yeah,
correct.
exactly. Yeah. And I think you can turn somebody off by just one word said either the wrong word or said the wrong way could turn and what if you turn that person off from religion and now they walked away from it? Because I'm not worried about going to heaven and the Lord saying, like, who'd you bring to Christ? I'm worried about having the conversation. Look at all the people that you pushed away by your talks and your deeds.
And I mentioned before that I believe part of our journey should be to become more gentle and gracious people. And if I might continue on something, I think this adds to the story here. So I mentioned I was in school doing all this internship, and hopefully you notice at this point my Testimonies has a lot of aggressive posture to it. I am a former gang member. That is going to be part of it.
I am a little afraid of you.
No, never.
She's not. She's got a gun.
Don't meet me in the parking lot.
She's got a gun, bro.
I was there for that conversation. So I ended up, somehow I was automatically catapulted into doing debates. I look back and I'm like, how did I go from, I was, meeting with pastors and so forth, to all of a sudden, January 5th, 2013, I'm debating Sam Frost, the former full preterist, and he's going to fly down to Fort Myers, Florida, and he's going to, I don't know if he drove or flew, but either way, he's going to come down to Fort Myers, Florida and debate me. I look back sometimes and I'm like, how did that happen so fast? And I think a lot of it was because of Facebook and me posting stuff online and going through my own journey. I would surely agree that we need to be more gracious with each other and gracious to each other in this journey of Christianity. So I say that because I automatically was somehow catapulted to doing debates, and you don't show up to the debate saying, I'm going to be really gracious when I get up there.
Definitely not a debate. That's not the place for it. No.
Well, it's an entertainment forum,
and it's a megaphone,
it's a megaphone, mm-hmm. right? You can go on a podcast and say this is what's right.
But you can watch a Don
you don't look
Preston.
Somebody in the eye.
Watch a Don Preston. He is a consummate professional and a gentleman.
Amen.
Always.
Some people can really pull it off,
but he also has the information to back it up. Do you see what I mean? Didn't mean he's ready. And if how sometimes if you don't have enough information, sometimes you'll just lash out or you'll try to find another way to win. I think he's able to be a gentleman because he's so rock solid in a lot of the things.
Don and Gary both have so much knowledge. I'm listening to them and I'm like, okay, I know nothing. So I'm going to shut up and I'm not going to ask a question because I don't want him to know that I'm more stupid than he really thinks I am.
Well, back to you, Mike. Sorry to interrupt you again.
Well, no, and I agree with Don Preston, great teacher, and that's what I was doing. I was learning from these men. So I'm listening, I'm learning, and I'm realizing I do have some truth here. So I'm doing these debates. I somehow get catapulted doing the debates. And the reason why I say that is because remember I kept saying about this know-it-all kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you put me in debates. And I'm not a kid at this point. I'm 20 something, 28 years, 27 years old. But I still have some growth. I still, here I am 38. I still have plenty of growth and
Still a
graciousness
know-it-all.
and still a know-it-all. I'm telling you, I'm repenting right now. So I get catapulted into doing debates, and I debated Sam, and then I was invited to do a debate in New York, where I'm from. So I'm from Fort Myers, and by the way, I was able to finish my work with Gordon Conwell. And then at this point, now I'm going to fly up to New York, and I'm going to participate in a roundtable. And I come up to New York, and I don't know if they told these other pastors they were going to be on a roundtable about eschatology. That's how at least it seemed when I got there. I was like, so you guys don't really know what's going on? Nobody. I mean, the one woman had her chart, it was all over the place, arrows every direction. But other than that, one pastor during the debate, and this is on YouTube, he basically said he didn't prepare. And I was like, what happened? Why am I here? And I realized again, it just further solidified this. People are confused. And in the midst of that, I met a group of people at that conference where I did that debate, and they said, "Would you be interested to come back to New York and pastor our church?" No, I live in Florida. Why would I go back to New York from Florida? Hello, everybody moves from New York to Florida, warm weather, etc.
Actually, people that move from Florida to here, and they call them halfbacks.
Halfbacks.
Yeah, halfbacks.
I've never heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Florida's
'cause we
too
go
darn
halfway back
hot.
to Florida.
That's right. So
This
they
makes
have
sense.
halfbacks. Yep.
Okay,
So
I
go
didn't get
back
that
to
move.
Florida.
So
How long do you think it'll take him?
You'll be here
How long? Yeah, you'll be back on here.
20 years.
Yeah, exactly.
No, we had this debate on social media. He likes New York. He's not moving.
Yeah, he's
right.
not.
Oh.
Yeah, it might be more than just the weather. So I ended up through a little bit of a journey there. Decided, I will go up there and I will talk with this church and see if this is the right fit. If this makes any sense. These people are nuts. They're going to call me to be their pastor. So I came up to New York, and they were some of the most diligent people and diligent Christians I've ever met in my life. Some of the most gracious Christians I've ever met. And again, you've heard my journey at this point. And I was like, wow, these people do exist. These people they're knowledgeable. They want to learn. They're gracious. They're going to take this guy to be their pastor. And I said, if they'll vote me in, it was a vote. I said, if they'll vote me in, I'll take that as a call of God, no doubt about it. And I believe I have to brag on Blue Point Bible Church, because if you look into the ancient church, what they would do is they would take young men, young know-it-alls, and they would form a community around them.
Yeah.
And that helps them grow. And I get to tell you the person I am today, not so aggressive, not debating, not meeting with the local pastor to try to argue with them about eschatology, is due to the growth and the graciousness that was provided by the Blue Point Bible Church. Mm-hmm. I say all the time that my congregation discipled me.
Right.
And you see that in church history. That's what they would do. They would take the young man, the young know-it-all, and help form him. Let him speak. Let him educate himself. Let him study to show himself approved, and teach a congregation and be blessed by the insights of the people around him. And it built me up. So I went through that whole journey. And then, of course, in my life today, if I might just mention where I'm at in my journey, I'm recently married, married in July. My wife is pregnant. And I have,
congratulations.
Thank you very much. And I have a 5-year-old stepson. And I say that because all of that, the congregation, the wife, children, you want to talk about learning to be gracious and realize I don't know it all? God has been faithful to help teach me these things. So that's where I'm at in my life right now.
He won't give you what you can't handle, but he'll certainly fill your plate.
That's right. Amen.
And I agree with you about pastors, because every church I've ever been to, because I've been known to be a know-it-all and a pain in the rear and hard to get along with, I just asked my wife. In fact, my pastor told my wife, "You really don't know what you're getting into. Let me sit down and let me tell you." And he was serious. And all of the pastors put up with me. In fact, especially my last pastor. I say a lot of things about Baptist and about pastors at Baptist that they're set in their ways and they're this and they're that. But my last pastor spent 10 years putting up with me. And I think that I brought something to the church, but he had to put up with me because I'm a different person and I ask questions. I'm always pushing limits. I'm always asking questions. I'm always that guy that's like, oh, here he comes again. Oh my gosh, there goes 20 minutes of my time. But he put up with me that whole time. It absolutely helped me become a better man, a better Christian, a better lot of things.
Amen. It's beautiful.
Yeah, you can see that in the Gospels. Like sometimes when Jesus is talking to the disciples, and he's like, "How long?
Right? How do I have to
long
put
do I
up
have
with
to be
this
with this
perverse
faithless?"
generation?
Yeah.
There's something else interesting about all that too. Just listening to you talk about your experience with Blue Point Bible Church, and how at the beginning, when you were locked up, you were searching for something more, and you just wanted family, you just wanted connection.
Oh,
And now
that's a
here
great
you
insight.
are with this beautiful wife and this baby on the way and this congregation that has surrounded you like family. And it's just that's a beautiful part of your testimony that I hope doesn't get lost in the conversation around theology. The loving heart of God to clearly see and answer the cry of your heart, so that your salvation wasn't just wrapped up in and around your position in your eschatological theologies. It was wrapped in and around the heart of a man that needed love and wanted family. And Jesus has just provided that.
That's right. Amen.
That's really
Well said.
beautiful.
Thank you
I
for
love
that.
that.
And I think all of the people out here listening need to take that to heart, because you all have pastors, whether it's a youth pastor that's new, or this pastor or that pastor, or someone at your church that is difficult in one way, because we're all difficult in some ways.
We'll call
And
them
it's-
Ralphish.
Yeah, exactly. That's the
Incredibly
Ralphism.
Ralphish.
That's
Be
right.
a bit Ralphish today.
Exactly. you need to get together as groups, and instead of crucifying this person and going to the pastor and saying we need to get to it, you all need to get in there and love on this person and help them see what it is that they're missing, because it takes a village in all aspects of our life, not just raising a kid at home, but raising you get a new pastor at your church. You need to raise them up to be a part of your community, and they just can't come in and say we're going to do it all different. They got to come in and learn. But the only way we're going to do that is if you love them.
So I have a question. So you're back sort of home where you started. So do you have any trouble with the former gang? Because you still aren't out, right? Because you don't really ever get out. So do you have any trouble with that gang, or is everybody just kind of aged out and old and they don't care anymore, or what?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I moved back, for the most part, most of the people I hung around are older and have matured or in prison for the rest of their lives, or unfortunately are dead. I think that's changed. And, I don't know how many gang members listen to your podcast, but I did put my foot in my mouth on another one
7.
a couple of weeks ago. So, I'm not going to go too much into that. However, I will say that, I do encourage people. When I first became a Christian, I tried to, maybe I can reform my gang. Maybe I can, see men walking as trees. I used that idea, and I said, I'm going to try to help the good in the gang world become good. I mentioned this on a podcast. Like I said, I mentioned this on a podcast. I would discourage that at this point in my experience, and I would say, if your younger people are involved in gangs, move away. Get away. So for my story, most of them had
Why
grown
do you
up.
say get away? Would Christ have gotten away?
No, I don't think he would. And I think if that's something that needs to be covered in prayer, needs to be thought about diligently. And again, as a grown man, maybe you can decide to stay. But if you're a child, if you're young, the best thing parents can do is move their child away and not keep that influence. But I appreciate you marking out that, yes, Jesus, that was my attitude. I'm going to be the Jesus and the light in the midst of darkness.
But they could not see you that way. They only saw you as Mike, the gang member.
Yeah, or somebody that they wanted to bring back to their way of thinking.
And no matter, in any manner possible.
Yeah, Mikey Bibles.
Mikey Bibles.
Yeah, they were saying Mikey Bibles.
What does the Bible tell us to, like, train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from this, right? Like, so if you're talking about children that are like 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, we have a responsibility to be more aware of what they're, Jesus can join a gang, that's fine, but a 12-year-old maybe not so much.
Yeah.
The grown man can make that decision for
Yeah.
himself and use discernment and decide. So
That's
again,
more what you meant, what you were saying.
Yeah, speaking more to youth, I think the best idea, because I have heard different, there's a lot of parents in the gang culture that will say things like, well, if my child leaves the area, they're going to find him and kill him, or they're going, unfortunately, the hard truth is you just have to move. Mm-hmm. You have to just make that decision.
Well, I'm going to let Billy ask his question because I know Billy has to leave and get out.
Which one? Both?
Whichever one you want to ask.
Well,
buddy.
I actually have three.
Yeah.
What about your dad? If you don't mind me asking.
My dad was absent most of my younger years. We have a mediocre relationship at best.
Oh, okay. All right. And this question, I haven't brought it up with a preterist view, and actually, I didn't know there was this many opinions and speculations about this. I just always assumed everyone knew where he was at. So, in your opinion, or what you have studied, where's Satan at now?
Wow, that's a good one.
That's an interesting question.
I didn't know there were so many answers.
Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, Mike, but
I believe the Satan you're reading about in the New Testament period, the Satan that was going to be destroyed in the book of Revelation, that Satan is done away and destroyed. However, biblically, and this might be a different position, but adds to your repertoire of understandings you've heard, there's various adversaries throughout the Bible. So I believe that in the first century, there was an adversary, a Satan, the Satan, that was being destroyed. And that Satan has been destroyed. However, we face adversaries today. We have trials today. Even in the fulfilled understanding, Revelation chapter 22, there's still sin. There's still the effects of filthiness, of all the things you read about in Revelation chapter 22, those that are outside the gates. So I do believe that there is still adversarial realities in the kingdom of God, despite the fact that the Satan, which the definite article, again, probably gets a bit technical. I did write a book called Wicked that leans in on that study. And in that book, I explained that there's various Satans mentioned through the Bible, and the New Testament is talking about the specific Satan that was being destroyed.
okay.
And I left it open-ended in the book just as much as I'm leaving it open-ended.
That's perfectly fine.
I'm going to have to do a little research into that one.
You're going to get an
Called
email.
Wicked. Yeah.
Yes, Wicked.
Well,
Yeah,
also
we're going to
gets
get into
temptation.
that too. I'm going to make sure that he talks about those books and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, and you touched on this one, and I ask everyone. You touched about like what you used to believe when you died. So what do you believe now when you die, Mike?
Revelation chapter 14 says, "Blessed are those who die in the Lord from now on." So I believe that ever since the events of AD 70, the salvation of the saints is secure. Now, I don't make it my business to determine who's a saint, but I believe that when we die, we go into whatever identity that is. Now, I don't believe in disembodied spirits. I know I've been accused of that. I don't know. Okay. I know that it's great and it's blessed.
Yeah, everyone has an opinion, and I agree with you. And I think, was it Don had the best answer so far? He's like, we go to heaven.
Would that surprise you?
I mean, yeah.
Don, Gary DeMar. Gary DeMar and Don had the same answer.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
where do you go when you die? And he's like, oh, I go to be in the
there's
Lord's
no soul
presence, and I get a new body.
There's no
spiritual
waiting.
body.
Yeah, exactly. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So, that was my questions.
Yeah. Does anybody else?
I get a lump
And
of
you have a
coal.
splendid voice to be a gang member, by the way.
does.
Thank you.
I thought the same thing.
Yeah, it's very splendid.
I
very
was such a
smooth and-
soft-spoken
yeah,
guy. I just can't see you being a gang
yeah.
member.
Give me all your money.
Yeah.
Give me all
So-
your money, please.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, they use
very
that for
good.
recruitment techniques.
He was the recruiter.
I thought about it exactly the other way. I was like, well, that was destined to change
I'll buy.
based on the voice.
Amen.
Yeah.
If I might respond to what Cherry had said, my wife knows that I detest when people say, I can never picture you as a gang member. I'm like, well, I was a gang member when I was 13 to 22.
22.
I'm 38. It's
Yeah.
been quite some time since I've been
Yeah.
a gang member.
Yeah.
And hopefully I've been growing in the midst of that. So I'm glad that I don't sound like a gang member.
I'm gonna tell you what.
That's great.
I wish people looked at me and could see my 22-year-old self. two kids wrecked that. I'll tell you what. I mean, I wish someone could look at me and be like, you know what, I could see that 20. I'll be like, well, thank you. You know?
What are you, 25?
But it's sir. That's cute.
Isn't he precious?
No, but my husband is. Woo! No, I'm kidding. No, he's 28. Sorry, he's 28.
And thou shalt rob the cradle.
I know.
Jeez. So,
Joke. Jokes.
Yet I don't have any more jokes. I actually have one, but I'm not going to do it because you already did one. But so the books you were talking about, I know that you said that you're going to be working on getting some printed here pretty soon. Tell us about like name those books? If I know that they can get them on Kindle, I believe, right? There was one that we found on Kindle.
I wanted to be, I read Freaked Out by the New Covenant before coming in. Well, I got rid of I'm at 40% according to my Kindle. But Wicked is next on the list. I'm really curious about that because it gets into one of my things, which is language. And when you're talking about, participles and present, different languages and how different languages are constructed and how that works when you translate into English, blah, blah, blah. So I'm really looking forward to that, but I wanted to finish this one first. But it took me forever to find it on Kindle. Someone else Rick had to help me.
Yeah.
Because
it's out there.
Freaked Out is on Kindle. Freaked Out by the New Covenant. I'm not sure about the other.
Which is Freaked Out for sure.
Yeah, Freaked Out, which is my testimonial, Freaked Out by the New Covenant. I start first chapter, the exodus of a gangbanger, or I think it was I forget the name of the chapter, but either way, it was my journey from that to ultimately becoming a preterist, new heavens and new earth. And I have a couple other addendums in the book. I actually included an article from the man that led me to Christ. It was called Accessing the Power of Christ, Embracing Our Vulnerabilities.
Right.
And then also the conversations, as I mentioned, with Alan Bondar. And then Wicked is obviously, it's a Bible study book. So it's not really a book that's meant to be read. There's no page numbers. I let you know that now. That wasn't intentional, but I like to try to make up reasons why I did that, but it never really makes any good sense. Forgot to put page numbers when I self-published. So Wicked is intended to be a Bible study book. So it brings you through angels, brings you through demons, brings you through Satan. And there are times where I just end open-ended, where it's, I'm glad to say that I'm working on myself to not be a know-it-all. I don't know. What do you get? Let's welcome the conversation. Namely, because I don't deny supernatural. I just don't know how to explain a lot of that. And I think that there's a convolution of spiritual and supernatural in a lot of people's minds. And I don't really know how to undo that. So that's why I leave a lot of those details open-ended. And then Clarity and Revelation was simply a study guide that we used to go through the book of Revelation at Blue Point Bible Church. It was a sermon series. And then I felt a lot of people asked me questions about it. I said the best idea would be to just publish the study guide.
Right.
And those are the three that are available. And I am working on some books this year. Yep.
Now, you also tell us about where they can find you on YouTube, and also you have some Facebook pages. Do you have a website?
Yeah, I have a couple different ministries. We have the Blue Point Bible Church is where I serve. It's my pastorate. However, serving there has given me the opportunity to do other things in ministry. For example, the Power of Preterism Network, which again is endeavoring toward my journey, clarity. I gained clarity. I'm still in the process of healing, learning different things. That's what I consider healing, is undoing the know-it-all attitude, which is a continued process. Healing in regards to that worldview of it's all about going to heaven and finding an application for today, and then strategizing on how we help other people understand this. So that was the goal behind the Power of Preterism Network: clarity, healing, and strategy. And you could go to powerofpreterism.com. We have a couple ministries through that. We do the Preterist Power Hour, which is on YouTube. That's a not bi-weekly, 2 times a week podcast, Monday and Friday. And we bring on different speakers, interviews. We focus on topics. More recently, we've been falling back to Genesis since the fall. We're still there, and we're only in Genesis chapter 2. So
sounds like our podcast.
It lets you know kind of what our style is like. It's very conversational, and they let me get on my soapbox a bit, and then we kind of open up conversation. So that's the Preterist Power Hour. We have Team Preterist, which again is just try to bring some camaraderie to the preterist community. Years ago, I noticed that there were a lot of preterists that didn't really care to contribute to the conversation, and I wanted to kind of involve them. And I said, well, no, we're all part of the same team, and we believe in progressing preterism. And the idea was that we weren't going to allow all the differences, because we all come from different frameworks. And, there's Church of Christ, there's Baptist, there's Pentecostal. And yet these folks are realizing the truth of preterism. So then it was, well, how do we come together? And then we also have Reformation Now, which another effort of unity is saying, well, even if you don't agree with preterism, that we can work together and say there's need for reform in the church. Mm-hmm. So, biblical literacy, et cetera, learning how to be gracious with each other and get along. Sure. So those are a couple outworkings of the Power of Preterism Network that have been going on for a couple of years. And then I also have a apologetics ministry, MGW, Miano Gone Wild.
Miano Gone Wild.
Yeah, which was a moniker given to me years ago. You know, I told you I did open air preaching. I didn't go into all the dressing like a prophet and carrying my cross through Fort Myers, Florida, but that was there.
Right.
So, you know, I definitely earned the title of Miano's Gone Wild. Look at him. And so then I ran with it, and we created a ministry out of that. And that's on YouTube as well, MGW Apologetics, or I think it's under my name, Michael Miano. And on Facebook, Power Preterism Network, MGW. I'm definitely a Facebook warrior, if to use that phrase.
He's got a new page coming out called I'm Right.
Yeah,
That's exactly right.
It's a good idea.
It is a good idea.
It'll be a bit Ralphish.
That's the subtitle.
Now, your wife,
I'm right, Facebook.
Rashonda?
A bit Ralph.
Yes.
Rashonda has a page too, doesn't she?
Well, she has Facebook.
A Facebook, but there was something, I saw something on our Burroughs page earlier. It almost looked like, I can't remember. It was some,
Our podcast? Is that what you're asking about? The
Yeah,
podcast with me and
your
my wife?
podcast.
Yes. So we have, thank you for bringing that up. That's probably the best thing to talk about, my wife.
yeah.
Yeah, Rashonda and I do a podcast. We try to do it every week. It's called The Pastor. You've Got Mail.
Yep.
The Pastor and the Mail Lady.
The pastor and the mail lady.
Yeah.
She did something like she liked or shared one of our posts earlier. And I was like, oh, yeah, we got to talk about that podcast.
Yes, so that's very conversational. You know, what I think our society needs is stuff, as I mentioned earlier, I do believe that this is the healing of the nations. Just
Yeah.
talking, being willing to have conversation, offending at times, but then hopefully giving each other grace to, you know, he's offended a lot of people. We'll give him a break. But, you know, again, and hopefully.
Jesus offended a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he was right.
He was right.
That's right.
He wasn't Ralphish. He was just right.
Actually, Jesus was a bit Ralphish.
Especially in the temple.
In the temple, yes.
He
You're right.
occasionally got a bit Ralphish.
Good gosh, I'm going to have to make so many T-shirts. In this
So what we did was we decided, my wife's, again, she brings out the best in me. If there is any best in me, she brings it out. She knows how to break down my mind in ways that fascinates me.
Yeah.
You know, she can keep me on target. You know, Rick, you've been talking to me for a couple of days now. You get it. I'm kind of all over the place. And my wife brings this gift that she can help me formulate my own thoughts. And then, of course, her thoughts are always beautiful. So I said, why don't we podcast? And we started doing this podcast. And we focus on marriage. We talked about the boroughs. She doesn't want to be called the borough. You know, she doesn't like that.
But she's from one of the boroughs, so it's kind of.
Oh, is that a New York borough?
Well, she's
Boom.
from Long Island. She's in
Yeah,
Long
I don't know
Island.
if Long Island's considered one of
It's
the
not a
boroughs.
borough. Is it not a
borough?
We're just the suburbs. Yeah, it would have
We'll
been
call
a
her the
good
bird.
push.
The Burbo. We'll call her the
So
Burbo.
Rashonda,
Burr.
if you're listening to this podcast, here's what we think. A borough is a beast of burden that carries burdens of others. So you've been doing that with your husband for quite some time now.
Yes.
So you're already
And-
on one by default.
You are one by default. But then also, they try to save people's life. Just ask Balaam. You're doing a good job. So we actually see burrows as a good
And actually,
thing.
burrows are put in pastures and stuff to save animals'
They
lives
are.
from bears,
Yep.
Sioux, and coyotes.
They're amazing animals.
Four-legged cougars.
That's
What
right.
about
Theology of the boroughs.
Sorry. What
Versus the two-legged cougars.
Oh my gosh!
so
We need to bring Rashonda down here to get you straightened up, pal.
Yeah.
Wow.
does your wife have the same view, preterist view?
I don't know that she calls herself a preterist.
Okay.
When we had first met, she comes out of the Kojic denomination,
Oh,
Church
yeah.
of God in Christ, and they're Pentecostal. You know, for the most part dispensationalist. And as we've talked, her and I, she's again helped me understand what I'm saying, which is great. And I believe that she's come to see the truth of it. She doesn't argue with me.
Okay.
And but again, I think that she shares an idea that we don't need to be so aggressive. We don't need to make that our focal point in everything that we have to disagree. And unfortunately, my wife and I, she experienced this right from the start. We're just married in July. 2 months ago, we visited a local church and they escorted us out due to the fact that they knew that I teach full preterism. So, you know, I pray for my wife and I hope that she continues to get a healthy understanding of these things and not so much.
Where can we find your podcast? Because I want to listen to that.
It's on Spotify, Apple Music, and Buzzsprout. This is
Okay.
the one that we use or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't like churches that escort people out, and I don't like pastors who say we don't want people like them in this church, because that's
That's not right.
that is not Christian at all. Period.
Jesus invited the tax collectors, the prostitutes in the house with him. So
What I find most shocking about that story is you were just visiting. You weren't invited to preach. You weren't, you said that you
didn't try to join.
Yeah, you instituted in your church
They
an
just
opportunity
knew
where
who
once
you
a
were.
month,
Yeah.
you go visit other churches, which is such a beautiful idea. I think that's so wonderful that you guys do that. And that's all that was going on. You were just creating fellowship by visiting another church.
Yeah, if I might speak to that, I'll just say this, and I think it has a lot to do with what we talked about. A lot of these things have to do with the way you're framing them. We noticed the conversations I was having with these pastors. I look back and I'm like, man, to borrow a phrase somebody said to me recently, it's cringy. It makes you like, ooh, maybe you should have a little bit more grace in the way you're approaching people. And here I was, this young kid. Imagine, I'm meeting with pastors that have been in ministry for years. Sure. Let me show you why you're wrong. So, yeah, I think that there needs to be more grace. And I think that I lost my point, but that's where I want to end. There needs to be more grace.
Yeah.
I think we all need a little more grace.
Yep. Well, earlier today,
Even Andy.
I
I get a lot.
yeah, Andy. Yeah, we have a new T-shirt called the Even Andy T-shirt, guys. We'll be releasing that pretty soon, probably on our February 2nd Patreon Super Brer Warrior. It's the Super Quiz Bowl. So this morning I put out, asked if anybody wanted to ask some questions of you. And I just got one about 12 minutes ago. It's not a question, though. It's from a person by the name of Mark Lautenville. Do you know him?
No.
He says, I've been hoping you would get to Michael Miano. Look forward to hearing this. So thank you, Mark Lautenville. Here he is. So now you're going to get to hear him.
Oh,
so
good
say
deal.
hello to Mark Lautenville.
Yes, Mark, thank you for the comment. And I do know that, again, you read names on Facebook. They don't always sound the way. So I do know that name. And thank you, Mark, for looking forward to the podcast.
And it says here that he's a top fan. Yeah, it's
of
awesome.
Burroughs.
It says he's a top fan of us or then our Facebook. Yeah, so he obviously looks. So thank you for listening and not watching, but being a Facebook follower, Mark. Also, before we go, and I want to thank you, Michael, for being on the show.
Thank you for the invite.
It means a lot that you came all the way down from Long Island to sit down here in Giraffe Studio in beautiful Hendersonville, North Carolina. See, I wasn't lying. I was telling the truth. Congratulations to a Mr. Travis Drum. Travis Drum won the 2022 Brer Warrior Bible Trivia Game. And I mean, he won those questions that I put at the end. Like, you had to really get down in it, get down deep. And he got them all correct, and he won that. So congratulations to him and some other people, Joshua Thompson, Kenna Drum. There's so many. We also got this cool little message, and I sent it to you guys this morning. And I wanted to make mention of this today because it was just so sweet. So if you guys will just bear with me. I just got an email from Charlton R. Carter.
Never heard of him.
I never have. He called himself Eye Candy.
Did he really?
Yeah, I called him Eye Candy, and he said he was a whatchamacallit. Yeah.
I've already used that one. Sorry.
Have you? Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, Rick, the other one. That's what I got saved in my phone.
Yeah.
The other one.
The other one. So Carrie Burt Thompson sent me a picture, and it says, y'all said recently that the Burrows were reaching a younger crowd lately, 30s and 40s. Just thought y'all would want to know. You have a 12-year-old fan who was really excited to open the mail today. And it's a picture of this young woman who's got the Burrows of Berea podcast hat on. And that's just adorable, man. I love it.
Well, thank you for listening.
Yeah, it means a lot to us. There was several people that won, but I remember this kid, Steven Jason was his name. He won the first 3. And so we're sending out, we got a lot of mailers. This week we're getting ready to ship out a lot of stuff. Beanies just got done. So if you guys want a beanie, put in your order for it. And
have you seen my head?
I have. Yes. I've got you a special beanie. Anyway, so again, thank you for being on the show, Michael. It means a lot that you came here to be with a bunch of Burrows around here.
Thank you for the invite. It's a blessing. I believe this is the healing of the nations.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah.
I believe we need to learn how to have good conversations. We need to learn how to be more gracious and apologize and maybe receive rebuke a bit more.
Do you have anybody in your life that you'd like to apologize to?
I have a lot of people I'd like to apologize to.
I had that same thought in my head.
You've got the next 75 minutes to no.
if I might say this, in the preterist conversation,
Yeah.
I do want to say I never want to offend anyone. So I apologize for offending in my speech in the way that it can be sharp sometimes. And I hope that, again, Jesus says that judge others the way you want to be judged. And I would hope that I can be gracious and people would extend that same grace to me. And I know I've acted like a know-it-all. I've acted like a jackass, not a burro, but a jackass.
Yeah,
In
same
sometimes. So if I might say this, in the preterist community, there's a lot of animosity. And I apologize to men that I've debated. I've debated Sam Frost. I've debated Stephen Whitsett. I've debated these men. And I apologize for anything that ever came off in a way that was brash and made it seem like, I don't know that I'm a know-it-all in recovery.
Yeah.
I apologize in that regard. I apologize to Gary DeMar for, again, he's receiving a lot of heat. He's receiving a lot of flack for just asking questions.
Right.
And that was my journey. I was asking questions and wanting to learn. So I never want people that are in the midst of that. Someone said to me recently, we need to find a place for those that are in a journey and just trying to learn and ask questions rather than saying, are you partial? Are you full? Or what title do you hold to?
Right.
Maybe we need to become comfortable with whatchamacallit.
Yeah.
So I apologize, Gary. I apologize, Don. I apologize to anybody that I've ever. That's the hallmark, in my opinion, of a Christian life.
Yeah.
And I hope this is a healing to a lot of people. And I know it's for me. It's been a blessing to listen to the podcast and see we're all on a journey. And there's a lot of things that we don't know about each other in our walks that we're not considering. And then the things that we're going through right now, the ministries that we're doing right now that we don't realize all the things that are going on in people's lives. So I want to say that I'm sorry.
I know how you can keep from offending people. Just say, hey, I'm from New Jersey.
But he's not.
They'll understand.
That's true.
That's like cussing to a New Yorker, isn't it?
Yeah, New Yorkers would love that. That's it. That's a good one. That's right. That's it. I'm from New Jersey. Sorry, folks.
Funny. Well, Eye Candy, thanks for hanging out. Mm-hmm. Mom So Hard.
Woo.
Appreciate you being here. Ralph, Andy,
Represent.
Sarita, Cherry, all of y'all. Does anybody have any
All
other
y'all.
questions? All y'all?
Yeah.
And all hearts and minds are clear? Mm-hmm. All right. Well, again, thanks again, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank
Mike.
you.
Thanks for
Yes.
coming.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks so much. This
was
was
awesome.
great.
Well, we will talk to you guys again next time on the Burros of Berea. Peace out.
Bye, y'all.
See ya.
Hey guys, this is Rick from the Burros of Berea. Do you know how much blood, sweat, and tears it takes to make a podcast? None. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't cost a lot. And so if you guys don't mind, if anybody would like to give to help us with these episodes, it would be great. We'll put out even more content. And if you go to our Patreon page, just search for the Burros of Berea, you'll get extra notes, extra episodes, and it's pretty much free. $1 gets you a lot. Thanks, guys.
I just texted my husband too because I'm like, is the house burned down? But no, if we're just going to go home, then it's fine.
Turns out it's not.
burn.
I would if it wasn't for the fact that my children are in that house.
You guys a t-shirt. I hear him in there.
Otherwise, I'd be like, enjoy that, sucko. Woo!
So I tried to get everybody the right size.